Good evening. My name is Catherine All, and on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Kitsap, I want to welcome you to the 23rd Legislative District, Position 1 Virtual Candidate Forum. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that doesn't support or oppose political parties or candidates. After careful study and consensus by our members, the League does take positions on issues, and we take action on those positions at the local, state, and national level. The League is a membership organization and depends on our members to organize and run events such as this. We invite all of you to become members and help us work on our basic belief that our form of government depends upon informed and active participation of its citizens. The candidates who will be on the primary ballot for the 23rd Legislative District, Position 1, in this order are Janell Hulst, Haynes, and Tarra Simmons. However, Janell chose not to accept our invitation to participate, so at tonight's forum, we will only have Mr. Haynes and Ms. Simmons. The rules for the forum are as follows. The candidates will be given 1.5 minutes to make an opening statement. After both candidates have spoken, the moderator will ask questions that have been submitted by the public. Both candidates will have 1 minute to respond to each question. At the end of the forum, each candidate will have 1.5 minutes to make a closing statement. Candidates, please keep an eye on the digital timer. Each one of you deserves our thanks for stepping up and running for office. Please be respectful of each other. You each deserve that. Now let's get started. We will begin with opening statements. And Ace, you get to go first.
Thank you. I like to start all of my meetings with the Suquamish land acknowledgement. Every part of this soil is sacred in the estimation of my people. Every hillside, every valley, every plain and grove has been hollowed by some sad or happy event in days long vanished. Chief Seattle, 1854. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is within the Aboriginal territory of the Suquabs, people of clear salt water, Suquamish people. Expert fishermen, canoe builders, and basket weavers, the Suquabs live in harmony with the lands and waterways along Washington's central Salish seas as they have for thousands of years. Here, the Suquabs live and protect the land and waters of their ancestors for future generations, as promised by the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. Thank you. I've lived here for my entire life, and I would like to represent the entire 23rd District. I was asked to do so by my friends, family, and neighbors when they were unhappy with how things have gone, particularly in 2020. And I believe that we have a lot to do to get our community back to a safe and open and exciting place to live. Right now, we have a two-party system that is far too frictive. I believe that Tarra would be the first to tell you that she can't get proper representation for us in Olympia because we're not a swing district. I believe that you will feel safe electing me as a Republican and restoring our representation. Thank you.
Thank you. Tarra?
Thank you so much, Catherine. First, I just want to thank everybody for joining in tonight. It's really important that we are engaged in our democracy and we are showing up to these forums and asking questions. I also want to thank Ace for opening with the land acknowledgement. I really appreciate that. You know, I am your current representative. It's been the honor of my life. I just finished my first 2 sessions. My first term is wrapping up at the end of this year. I serve on the Public Safety Committee, the Healthcare Committee, the Rules Committee, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Civil Rights and Judiciary Committee. And during my first 2 sessions, I think I was uniquely effective for a freshman. I passed 6 pieces of bipartisan legislation. I did work across the aisle to get things done, and also was able to make significant investments in our community, from supporting small business owners to domestic violence survivors, to land conservation and forest conservation, and invest in so many different programs, including our ferries, which is a huge issue for our community. We made a critical investment in our ferries this last session, where we passed a $17 billion transportation package, but also making sure that we were focused on preservation of our current infrastructure. So I've learned my way around the virtual rotunda now, and hopefully I go back next session in person and continue to represent you. So thank you for joining today.
Thank you. Okay, let's start with this sort of general question. And Ace, you get to go first on this question. Tarra will go first on the next one. What are your funding priorities for the upcoming session? And would you consider cutting some of the corporate tax breaks?
First and foremost, I would like to make it clear that my funding priorities are to restore the constitutional requirement that half of our state budget goes towards education. I'm not particularly picky with how we get there, but I couldn't imagine that cutting more tax breaks without massive spending cuts in other areas would be the way to go. I'm far more interested in reforming how taxes are applied than I am slashing them, particularly the gas tax. Doesn't seem to suit our residents at all. But as far as corporate tax rates go, I think they're more than fair in most areas. And occasionally there's some minor loopholes, particularly with the way the PPP grants were given out. They were originally slated as loans, but they really incentivized corporations not to do their fair share in the recovery. And I believe that we have a lot to do in order to make a fair tax code for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Tarra?
I'm really pleased with our state legislature for passing the capital gains tax and investing that money into education. We are finally fully funding education, and it's been such a long time to get there. I would probably focus really on our behavioral health system right now. It is critically underfunded, and it is causing so many of the issues that we're facing today, and including our housing crisis. I would focus on the housing crisis, on behavioral health, and continue to improve upon our transportation infrastructure, because a lot of times you can address a lot of issues at once through transportation, and getting to healthcare, getting jobs out there. I absolutely would not roll back any of the reforms that we've made on our corporate taxes. I believe that still in Washington state, it's one of the best places to do business for large corporations, and we need to address that.
Okay, thank you. We're going to get into a couple of questions that were submitted by several of the members of the public, and they do deal with housing. So Tarra, you get to go first on this one. What are your thoughts regarding the constitutionality of RCW 35A 63-300, which was passed in 2019, which gives increased density bonus for affordable housing located on property owned by a religious organization? Does this violate separation of church and state?
Well, I can't say for sure if it violates the Constitution. I am a lawyer, but I did not do the legal research required to answer that question. And since it happened before I came to the legislature, I wasn't involved in the conversations. I will say, I do believe in a separation of church and state, and that's for a lot of reasons, but mostly because of a person's liberty to choose or not to choose to be a part of a religion. And we have those rules in place for reasons. I will say sometimes there are nonprofits that are associated with some kind of a religion that then offer a public service. And sometimes that is really helpful because we don't necessarily have a completely secular organization willing to fill that need. I prefer it to all be secular, but sometimes we do, they keep things separate. But but sometimes there is a benefit to partnering with religious organizations.
Thank you. Ace?
I'm going to ask this a lot. May you please repeat the question?
It's regarding the constitutionality of the law that says gives increased density bonus for affordable housing located on property owned by a religious organization.
So this seems like a very small faucet of a much larger issue. We have a study that's been circulating in the 23rd in the greater Kitsap area for a while now that uses terms like affordable housing to mean regulated housing. And the idea that we have to regulate affordable housing into the marketplace and we can't simply provide the general economic environment that would make what we all believe is affordable housing possible, just kind of lacks common sense. We right now have that study mentions another section called the missing middle, and it's referring specifically to medium density housing that honestly, I think anybody that reads that phrase is thinking about middle class housing and the fact that the rents for and housing costs for much larger homes has gone beyond what even the middle class can afford. So thank you.
Okay, and it's interesting because you get to go first on the next question, and it's about a bill, was called the Missing Middle Housing Bill. It failed to pass last session, but it would have mandated an increase in housing density for Washington cities, allowing the construction of duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes on lots currently zoned for a single family house. So would you make clear whether you support this or not?
So when I originally heard about this middle density housing, it sounded like a principle that was put forward by the strong towns. They believe that we currently have oversized city groups that have things called strouds, where you can't actually either travel correctly on a road or function properly as a street. And I believe that when they talk about these duplexes and quadplexes, possibly with a commercial floor on the bottom, they're actually talking about a very modern city structure that we desperately need in place of more dense units, large apartment complexes that require cars to get to anything. So I believe they're talking about this in place of larger density units, and it sounds like a great idea. To put them into neighborhoods that are traditionally single family lots and updensing those doesn't sound good at all. So there's a lot to be worked out on that bill. Thank you.
Okay, and Tarra, your thoughts on?
Yeah, that was House Bill 1782, and I did co-sponsor the bill. And what it would do is eliminate single-family zoning near transportation, so within 1/2 mile of public transportation, within the city limits of Bremerton, Poulsbo, and Bainbridge Island. And I really believe in the philosophy behind that, because we do need to build more affordable housing near transportation, and people are just being priced out, and we're experiencing an increase in homelessness, and we need affordable housing, and we need more supply. However, what I learned through that process is that Bainbridge Island in particular relies on a sole aquifer and couldn't support that and had some issues. And so the bill did not pass. By the time that we were about to vote it off the House floor, basically Poulsbo and Bainbridge Island were eliminated because of the size of those communities, and Bremerton would only be impacted a small area, but we still need to address the issue, and I'm going to continue to work on it.
Okay. All right, let's get into education now. Last session, the funding of the prototypical school model was increased to support more physical, social, and emotional support in the schools. Would you support increasing funding to meet all current needs in the schools? And Tarra, you get to go first.
Yes, absolutely. One of the big reasons why I ran was to eliminate the school to prison pipeline, which I truly believe is the trauma to prison pipeline. And what we see is, early intervention with appropriate wraparound services and guidance and support. Not everybody has a healthy family of origin. And so having an adult in your life that you can connect to and trust really does change the trajectory of people's lives, of children's lives. And we need more nurses and psychologists and school counselors in our schools. And we made a big down payment on that, but I would love to see more. And I'd love to see it grow into having culturally appropriate connection resources for all kids, because not all kids will connect with the same person. And so we need to have more diversity within that program and continue to build upon it.
Okay, thank you. And Ace?
May I hear the question again?
Sure. Last session, the funding of the prototypical school model was increased to support more physical, social, and emotional support in the schools. Would you support increasing funding to meet all current needs in the schools?
Assuming that our funding level has actually made it to equal, I don't think that we need to drastically increase funding. Our schools have a huge problem with disproportionality. So the funding that they do get goes towards bureaucrats and buildings and not teachers and direct assistance and product. So I don't understand why we send kids to schools where they have a great big beautiful building and no construction paper. I think that we have a lot to do with reorganizing the funding to our schools, but my top focus would be teachers, classroom sizes, and making sure that those teachers have the support so that they don't spend their paychecks on basic school supplies. That social, physical learning, what the term you use there, sounds a lot like more bureaucrats and less teachers. And I think we could do a little reverse course on some of that. Thank you.
Okay. This is a little complicated question, but it's about charter schools. There were a series of 4 stories on NPR, our KUOW radio station, about impact charter schools that didn't follow the law on instructing special education and English language learner students. Parents, teachers, and students were interviewed and all pretty much told the same story. And neither OSPI or the Washington Charter School Commission accepted responsibility for investigating these schools. Is it time to look at the charter school law and revising it to prohibit this type of situation happening again? And Ace, you get to go first.
Any charter school law is going to be subject to these types of violations. It's one of the biggest problems with trying to expand it and stay statewide is you get very little choice way out in the middle of nowhere, and you don't have a good school to go to. You only have a bad charter school that isn't obeying the rules. I don't think charter schools can be held to the same accountability standards as our public schools, and our public schools aren't even doing that good a job. It's important that municipalities and small areas have access to charter schools as an alternative to the public school system that's failing them, but to try and create it as a statewide program isn't appropriate for Washington state or most states in the union. I don't think that our current system of charter schools has anywhere near enough oversight, and it's mostly been put in place as a stopgap to the failing school district because they were underfunded. We need to get this shit back on track. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to repeat the last part of that question so we can get your yes or no on the record. Do you think it's time to look at the charter school law in our state and perhaps revise part of it so this doesn't happen again?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no,
Okay.
At the state level, we could remove quite a bit of the charter school. That's what I meant to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Tarra, you're answer to this question? I don't know if you've seen the articles or.
Yeah, I actually, one of my coworkers, his wife is the principal of a charter school over there in Seattle that had some of the exposure. And so I've heard a lot about the issue. And, you know, I just joined the legislature 2 years ago. I was hoping I wouldn't have to get into this big charter school fight because it's a huge fight. And a lot of people in our community have a lot of opinions about it. And then we have a charter school now in our district, which is the Catalyst. And so I went down there recently and spent a few hours going through the classrooms, talking with all of the students and the teachers and the administrators and learning more about the program. And it is really serving some of the most diverse kids in our community. Kids, you know, that have physical disabilities are inclusive in the classrooms. So I really like the model, but yes, we need to revise the state law for more oversight of these charter schools, because when they're good, they are good, but we need to make sure we're, you know, have appropriate oversight.
Okay, great. Okay. And Terry, you get to go first on this one. What, if anything, can the legislature do to make sure that all residents have adequate health care, including access to reproductive health and end of life?
Well, thank you for the question, because I have a bill on that. I introduced the bill last session along with Senator Randall from the 26th. It's called Keep Our Care Act, which has to do with the mergers and acquisitions of religious hospital systems, which are limiting our access to reproductive health care and gender affirming care and end of life care, and making sure that in the future, if mergers happen, that we have oversight by our Attorney General's office in those decisions. However, we are currently looking at a variety of things to help in the wake of Dobbs around abortion access for sure, and making sure that people's private health information is kept private, that we are not complicit in, our healthcare providers are not complicit in breaking the law of other states. And we just need to really support smaller providers that do offer this care in our community and help them be successful.
Okay. Ace?
May you please repeat the question?
Well, it's basically what can the legislature do to make sure all residents have adequate health care, including access to reproductive health and end of life?
So I believe that we have a state right to health care. And as Tarra mentioned, the religious health initiatives have taken over many of our options for healthcare, and they've done so in a completely unregulated fashion. I would like to put upon them a tremendous amount of the regulations that we should have from the Civil Rights Act. I don't see any reason why, just because they're church affiliated, they somehow get to operate outside of the system that we've put forward for healthcare. They're hospitals first and churches second. And so I want to force them by law to provide many of the services that they might find most objectionable, including right to a honorable end of life, as well as advancement of abortive services. I think it's a little weird that we don't have abortive services in the place that's best able to handle things that could go wrong. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both for that. Okay, and this question is about redistricting, and Ace, you get to go first. The voting district lines across the state were recently redrawn, and the process was somewhat controversial. Legislators write the rules for redistricting. Are there any changes you would support to the Washington State redistricting process? If so, what would those be? It's a complicated question.
Thank you for the 60 seconds. The problem with redistricting right now is been most clearly evident from the last redistricting cycle and even the 23rd district itself. We were already a 65% Democrat district. We got bumped up to a 70% Democrat district just so that we could be ignored in the state legislature. The reality behind redistricting is it's not chosen by the people who are the ones who deserve to be represented. It is very much the elected choosing their electorate, and it doesn't serve anyone well. I would have swore that the only way that we could have advanced the 23rd district, which very much had to happen, was to expand south and west from Silverdale, as it was the only land border in the district. Instead, we actually lost part of Silverdale to gain a whole bunch of Bremerton. And I'm not sure anyone in Bremerton was really comfortable with that switch. But as far as legislative change, yes, any and all. I can't imagine leaving the system as is for another 10 years. Thank you.
Okay. Tarra?
Thank you, Catherine. I am not clear of what the best route would be for this. Maybe, potentially expanding the number of commissioners. It is a really, really tough process to get 3 out of 4 to agree. I was also surprised by the midnight. I mean, I was watching it with everybody else at midnight and going off and coming on, and we didn't know what happened. It was a lot of confusion, not enough transparency. And it's difficult, and they can only meet 2 at a time, right? So I think that is something that's difficult, is that nobody can meet more than with 2 commissioners at a time to negotiate. So it just seems like this was a really difficult time, and it could be because of COVID and being on Zoom. But I think, expanding the number of commissioners would be great. I did appreciate all of the outreach that they did. I know that the League of Women Voters were very helpful in that, and I appreciate that. And at the end, I'm very happy with the 23rd.
Okay. All right. This is another sort of voting question. In the last several sessions, there have been bills because of low voter turnout in odd year elections, when city council, school board, fire commissioners, and other local officials are elected. Would you support legislation to have all elections in even years, when local candidates would be at the bottom of the ballot under federal, state, other officials? And do you think this would increase or decrease the number of voters in the local elections?
Do I go first? Is it my turn to go first?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
Had it written down right here.
Yeah. I would support this, and I'll tell you why. Because we do see low turnouts in off years, and it is really, really hard. And especially for these local races, they're not raising the amount of money to do the outreach, to get people out to vote, to advertise. And people are not voting a lot of times in the off years. However, the auditors really do not like this idea because they said, well, how will they staff their offices if they don't have an election every year? What is the staffing model going to look like? So I do want to, hear more about it and get into it more, but I do think it would help with voter turnout and allow the, school boards and the local city councils and the firefighters, referendums and things like that to have the attention that they need to.
Okay. And Ace, what do you think about putting all elections in 1 year rather than?
Well, this one's an easy one for me. As a voter, I would be completely overwhelmed to try and research every candidate, every district, and vote on them at the same time. Furthermore, I've seen what happens in the county. Voter turnout is a PCO issue. Our precinct committee officers can go around and raise or not raise the vote as it seems at any given time. I watched the 2021 school board elections come and go, and the Kitsap County Republican Party Central Committee there didn't really get any candidates up on the board. And that was with it being an off year and them having it be the only issue to worry about. So I don't think we're going to get better candidates by combining the elections. And I think that even voters need, time off, or possibly simply wouldn't vote for these races to begin with, regardless of when they were held. So I don't see any reason to focus that as a legislative priority when we have so few minutes on the legislative floor. Thank you.
Okay, and I'm going to take a chance here and throw a different question out, but it has to do with the length of ballots. And right now, the advisory votes are at the top of the ballot. And I've had young people ask me, why would I bother to vote? They don't count. And they just lose interest in the whole election. So what is your thought on doing away with advisory votes or putting them at the bottom of the ballot? And let's keep the same order for this. Tarra, you get to go first, and then Ace.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm actually very supportive of that. I almost, during my last session, we could only introduce 7 bills, but that was one of the bills that I was going to prime sponsor, along with Senator Cooter in the Senate, was the elimination of the advisory notes on the ballot. They really, in my opinion, are more kind of like propaganda in the way that they're written, and they don't matter, and they don't do anything. And so I would like to see them eliminated for a lot of reasons, both for confusion of voters, who a lot of voters don't even know that they don't count. And they think that they have to come up with the answer. They're difficult to read. They're written in persuasive language. It's a lot of issues with those. But moving them to the bottom might be a reasonable kind of compromise with the people who really want those on there. But yeah, I really do think we should do something about it.
Okay, and Ace?
I understand that they don't matter and they take up a little ballot space. Honestly, they give a little weight to it, and maybe they give voters something longer to think about. Depending, like, we don't get anything from them is a little bit of a misnomer. I mean, they do get tabulated, and we get to see how people would vote had it been a matter of import, that we had a real running bill on. But more importantly, as Tarra pointed out, within her first month of this job, she knows full well we only have so much time on the legislative floor. And I can't imagine wasting even so much of a second of it with whether we move these things, flip them around, change the wording. Like, they're nostalgic and traditional, and maybe in the future we'll find a way to restore value to them again. But to just discard them with what little time and energy we have to fix the problems in our state seems like a really misguided effort. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and Ace, you get to go first with this, and it may just be what you've heard or what you believe, but several laws were passed and lots of funding was provided. And so what progress is the state making towards making broadband available to all?
So this has been a very important issue in the 23rd district. Drew's been working very hard on it for a long time. And Tarra can tell you firsthand that when she went to Olympia and found out that this had to be a bipartisan bill, even though the Democrats had control of the office because it was considered controversial or progressive, we couldn't get it done. She'd reach across the aisle and find some Republicans that would be willing to do it. I'm absolutely one of those Republicans. This is a 23rd district issue. We need broadband access. It's not working to leave it in the hands of corporations. They did a really good job profiting on the early setup, but now it's a common need in our society, and it can't be left for corporations to control. So I believe that by being elected as a Republican in the 23rd, both me and whoever gets elected next to me will be able to get this to be a bipartisan issue and advanced through with much less resistance. Right now, the Democrats can't even get this done because of other Democrats stopping them, and they won't tell us who. Thank you.
Okay, and Tara?
Yeah, the bill that Drew shepherded through the legislature, Representative Hansen, my seatmate, allows now for the public utility districts to offer broadband. And we're very fortunate here in Kitsap County. We have a great PUD who's been ahead of the curve for a long time. Our Paulsville City Council member, Ed Stern, is also on the Public Works Board. And I believe, Kitsap County will be one of the first public utility districts to offer this, but there is some work that needs to happen. We just allocated the funding, and a lot of things need to be put in place before we can offer it here, but it is moving in the right direction. And I think that Deborah Lester or Ed Stern would probably be better equipped to actually talk about where they're at in the implementation here in Kitsap County.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Keeping an eye on the clock. Okay. And Tara, you get to go first with this one. With the US Supreme Court ruling limiting the power of the EPA, what would you like to see our legislature do to increase environmental protections?
Fortunately, in Washington, we have passed recently a lot of great progressive policies to address climate change, and we are continuing to do so. And so I think, going forward, we still have, a lot more to do before we are not relying on fossil fuels. We do need to incentivize electric vehicles and have charging stations everywhere. We need to make sure that we are having accessible public transportation options. Here in Kitsap County, there isn't bus service on Sundays or at night. We don't have bus service for a large part of our district. And so the more we can increase, bicycle lanes, I love that we passed legislation to eliminate the passenger fare for children on public transportation, including our Washington state ferries. Getting our young people into using public transportation and making sure that all of that is electric is great.
Okay, thank you. Ace?
I would like you to repeat the question, please. Thank you.
Yes. With the US Supreme Court ruling limiting the power of the EPA, what would you like to see our legislature do to increase environmental protections?
So as Tara pointed out, we are very fortunate in this state to have strong state protections. We weren't really dependent on the federal EPA. I personally am excited to have been meeting with many of the people around Helen Price Johnson at the US Department of Agriculture, Rural Development, and seeing how their different takes on our expanding utilities can meet our environmental needs as well. It's really important that we take care of everybody, environment first, and the adjacent landowners, the ability to enjoy that environment. Right now, we have a massive problem with the way the Growth Management Act has not protected our sensitive lands and has restricted areas that have already faced development from expanding growth. The biggest problem that I see with the loss of the EPA is it does put a lot of extra strain on the Department of Ecology to really step up and do the entire ladder where they were previously sharing that responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and Ace, you get to go first on this one. Is there anything the legislature can do to make sure the state colleges and universities and community colleges are affordable to all? Did I say who goes first?
That was me,
Yeah.
right? Yes. Okay. And yes, that was a very big question in 60 seconds. We'll see what we can do. The affordability of our state colleges should have been one of the priorities of increasing our school spending. I don't see any reason why it would have been limited to K through 12. And I believe it's actually being spent on a lot of trade schools as well. So there's really no reason why we would have a lack of affordability other than a lack of funding at the state level. And this is supposed to be a top priority. The biggest issue I see with some of our state colleges is actually that we have a kind of a dramatic increase in demand. Could be helicopter parents, but everyone thinks they get to go to college now, and we haven't increased the availability. So we do have a massive upper education gap, and we've been trying to fill it with a lot of vocational schools, which is great, but it's not the end of this problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Tarra?
Thank you, Catherine. You know, I think that we have done some really great things in Washington State. If you look at other states, again, my wonderful seatmate, Representative Drew Hansen, passed a huge bill that now allows for free college at community college for, I believe it's a family of four making under $50,000 or $75,000 a year. They do get free tuition now at local community colleges, which is great. This last session, we passed a bill that created a student loan program for Washington State, and I believe it's 1% interest. You know, so people don't have to rely on the federal government for student loans with a huge interest rate. We need to continue to grow on that. So we need to continue to make sure that it's not at $50,000 or $75,000 a year, that it's $100,000 a year. And that's the same thing with like Medicaid, right? We started and then we continue to grow up the federal poverty level standards until we achieve what I hope is free universal post-secondary education.
Okay, and this will be our last question. Terry, you go first on this one. Is there any more legislation you would like to see passed to bring greater fairness in the area of racial and poverty injustice?
Catherine, we will be here all night long because this is my passion area. You know, there is racial inequality in every system, from the foster care system to our criminal justice system. Our health outcomes for Black women postpartum are much higher than, or much lower than white women. Educational gap. So we need to continue to get to the root and it is race and class, and it is poverty and race, but we see a disproportionate number of people of color that come from poverty. So how can we reach back to the very beginning and make sure that child has a first chance? That's why I'm huge in support of eliminating adverse childhood experiences. Our community here, Kitsap Strong, is doing great work throughout our community and pulling us all together to develop programs and policies. And I'm a champion for them in the legislature and get the funding for a lot of programs here in Kitsap County that address this. But yes, I couldn't tell you one because there's probably 100 at least.
Okay, all right, Ace.
I would have let her go on for another 30 seconds on this one, but can I hear the question again?
Yeah, what legislation would you like to see passed to get greater fairness in the area of racial and poverty injustice?
So I think this has definitely come up most evidently in the housing issue lately. As I was reading through some of these reports, they refer to affordable housing as regulated housing, which is still ridiculously expensive, but because it's regulated, it somehow qualifies as affordable. And they have another class of housing called housing that is affordable, but even that just means housing that only costs 30% of the occupant's income. So it's really housing that's affordable for the people that have a lot of income. So when it comes to actual equitable housing and affordable housing in the terms that me and I think everybody else uses it, even the studies we have don't include that in the very definitions that they're working from. I think that we can get back to real affordable housing through helping small property owners adequately develop extra housing units on their oversized lots. And at this point, we're not doing anything to help the smallest people get the help they need. So thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll go into 1.5 minute closing statements. And Tara, you get to start with closing statements.
Thank you, Catherine. I just first want to say thank you, and thank you to ACE too. It's nice to see that we're aligned on many issues, and thank you for being civil in our election process. I just want to say I grew up here in this community. I raised my kids here. They went to public schools. My son now is in boot camp. He's going to be a Marine. I am very excited about that. And you know, I've worked around the county. I was a registered nurse. I am an attorney now, and I'm fighting for racial justice and for helping people who have come from marginalized backgrounds to get out of poverty, to have an opportunity for employment and housing and all of the issues that we care about. Because when we're all together and we lift all of us up, then all of us can thrive. And so it has been an honor to serve you. I have been effective. I enjoy the committees I'm on. I'm going to continue to work across the aisle with impacted community and police on public safety. On one of my bills, you know, made sure that people coming out of prison had 6 months of a housing voucher, so that way they're not released homeless anymore. It's mind-blowing that we would release people homeless, and then we are responsible for the crime when that happens, and we are not promoting public safety or giving people a fair shake at life. And so a lot of my work is on reentry, on behavioral health, on early childhood education, and investing in preventing adverse childhood experiences. I'm endorsed by both of the tribes, by our county prosecutor, sheriff, and so many others, and I would love to serve again for another 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. Ace, your closing statement.
Thank you. And yes, I would agree with Tara that we are fairly well aligned on many of the issues. One of the online surveys put me at kind of a centrist Andrew Yang sort of position. And then she was in the same direction off center, but just way off on the margins in far ideologue land. So I think that that's one of the things that we do differ on is in style. I think that she very much enjoys representing the fun constituents in the district, and I would like to represent as many, if not all of the constituents within the district. I believe Kitsap County is known for representing itself in an enlightened way, and they would like to see better representation from Olympia on their issues. I think that they're smart enough to know that one of the ways to do that is to become a swing district, and we are known for electing Republicans both in this county and this state. We are a purple state and a purple county. The problem is they haven't been given very many good options lately. So I believe I represent myself and my district and would be a great option for us to have for a couple of years to get our issues put forward. I believe I can do a fair job, much like Phil Cook, the county assessor, has done a fantastic job. Kim Wyman has done a great job. And honestly, watching Liz Cheney up there has been great as well. So I very much look to run in the model of a Republican that we can look up to in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't know if you noticed the BCAT sign here on our website, but we want to thank BCAT for recording this forum for broadcast on cable channel 3 or 12. For us up here, it's 12, I believe. This forum will air at 9:30 p.m., followed by the Kitsap Commissioners Forum, which will be later this week at 10:30. On Sundays, July 17th, July 24th, and July 31st. In addition, the league has also recorded this, and it will be on our website, which is lw-kitsap.org, and it'll be up there in a few days. I noticed, I just looked back, and at one point we had about 40 participants. We usually have a good group of other people who go to our website and watch the forums later because they couldn't make it at the time we were having them. So, and thank you both again for stepping up and running. 100 years ago, I ran for the school board, and I know it's not easy being out there campaigning and and so forth. But it's worth it, and it's part of your civic duty. And thank you both, and
Thank
have
you.
a good evening.
Thank you, Catherine.